Treasury practitioners. I'm Joe Grabowski. I'll be hosting today's chat along with Scotty John and Simon Lynch. Today's guest is Peter Hutt. Peter will be chatting with us about his career, his views on networking and relationships, and how diverse finance experience can benefit you as a Treasury practitioner. We do have questions we'll be asking Peter, but this is also your chance to ask questions to another Treasury professional. Scotty will be monitoring the conversation, so please feel free to drop them in the comments. We'll make sure that we get them answered for you. Peter, how are you? Thanks for joining us.
Super, thanks. Glad to be here.
We appreciate the time as always. And where in the world are you located?
I'm in Seattle, Washington.
Perfect. And we were just chatting a little bit before this that recently found out Seattle actually gets more sun than Detroit does, which is very strange. And you had mentioned that it's very sunny there. So
today, at least, it's rarely do you see this kind of glare in the background. So sorry about that.
No, it's perfectly fine. So with that, Simon, let's kick it off.
Peter, you've had a really impressive background, predominantly in Treasury early, but then you've diversified into FP&A, risk management, and tax at various companies. What have been some of the highlights in your mind in your career so far?
Sure. Well, let me just add a little bit to that. I did consulting for a little while before I sort of did had a number of positions in retail companies. In terms of highlights from my career personally, I think I had some dumb luck in my career where I was in the right place at the right time. During a corporate spinoff, I was sort of made treasurer of this company that spun off. And prior to that, I actually started out in FP&A. So my background was more on that side, and then getting into Treasury. I'm not a CPA, I'm more of an MBA type. In terms of highlights, things that helped out, whatever company I was with in the Treasury area. I was able to convince at Nordstrom the board to swap a big $650 million note to floating, which is kind of counterintuitive, but it was a good deal for us because we had a lot of floating rate assets, and that paid off nicely. And the tricky part was the influencing, of the board, because it sounded really scary. I think we had to spend a long time with them to get them there. Other things, like at Nordstrom, it was a company that had a lot of different divisions. And so we were sort of worked very closely with FP&A because they did everything in terms of P&Ls and stuff. And we were sort of the balance sheet folks. And so anytime it was like a return on investment kind of a question, we helped out with that. So there was sort of a big element of FP&A, I'd say, in the Treasury group at Nordstrom. Yeah, and like there was one balance sheet. So if you want to look at it divisionally, we'd break it up for them. We did some I did some cost seg work, and that's something in tax that's really, can create a lot of value, and it's not that risky at all. It's a little bit of work though. On FP and FPA kinds of projects, done some fun stuff where you can look at competitors' books, their public filings, and get a sense for, what their dating is with their vendors. We did that at Nordstrom, and we determined that Macy's, our big competitor, we figured they must be getting 45-day terms, and we were 30. And it doesn't sound like a big deal, but it was like $150 million of cash that just appeared. I mean, with no cost. And the vendors complained, but it was true. So what are they going to do, right? And the risk management, I think one of the neat things I worked on at one point was trying to figure out better ways to incentivize our TPAs and manage claims and whatnot. So that's just all over the place, but kind of some highlights, particularly if you think about it from a what creates value standpoint.
Peter, just to give some clarity for the listeners, you started your career with Deloitte. You spent 3 years in consulting, and as you say, you had a really strong retail background. You're with Homebase, You're with cooking.com, Mrs. Fields Famous Brands, Abercrombie and Fitch, Eddie Bauer, and then most recently Nordstrom. So a really heavy flavour there of retail, as you mentioned, but just wanted to give the listeners a little bit more colour.
Thanks. Yeah, sure.
So Peter,
Go ahead.
sorry, please.
Well, I was just going to say my daughter really appreciated because she was like a teenager when I was at Abercrombie, and then I went to Nordstrom, and she appreciated the more sophisticated apparel. So it's all about her.
That's awesome. So short of getting a little lucky and keeping daughters happy, if you had to go back and speak to your 20-something-year-old self, what piece of advice would you give to yourself or anybody else just starting out in their career?
Yeah, this is what I would tell myself, and so and not everybody's going to be like me, but I think I was really impatient as a young guy, starting out my career, and I wanted to go straight up, I didn't, and I was pretty pushy, so I would say what I would tell my young self would be, be patient, keep your head down, lead with your strengths, those kinds of things. Maybe it sounds trite. I think one thing that they used to say at Deloitte was you should think of your career like an hourglass. So you start out like a generalist, and then you kind of specialize in the midpoint of your career, and then you get generalized again. And I think that's good advice. So it's you can kind of break your pick as a young guy or young woman. If you just want to go straight up, it's a good time to learn and go sideways, so to speak, and learn a lot. And so that's why I think you guys want to talk about, FP&A and other areas, and what are some things you could do outside of Treasury, because I think that there's a lot of overlap and there's a lot of learning that can happen there. So like one thing I didn't do was when I was with D&T, I was in consulting, and I couldn't imagine getting a CPA at that point in my life, and it would have been the smartest thing to do. It would have been pretty easy. I mean, I wasn't doing auditing, right? But I could have done it, and I should have done it. So it was just, impatient kid kind of thing.
I absolutely love the
I'm
hourglass.
sure all of your the people that are tuning in wouldn't make that mistake, but.
And I absolutely love the hourglass analogy. Another one that we talk about quite a bit is sometimes it's a career jungle gym, not necessarily a career ladder, right? Like it's not always going to be upward trajectories. Sometimes you got to take a step back, take a step sideways, whatever it may be, make
Right.
that lateral move just to develop yourself to move forward. And then you do figure out where your strengths are along the way. And that's what you specialize in. That's where you make the name for yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So knowing that you have such diverse experience, obviously being on the consulting side and on the corporate side, what's been your approach to networking and mentorship throughout your career, and what advice would you give to the audience in that regard?
So this is, again, might not be generalizable. It depends who you are, but I think some finance folks, and I probably count myself among them, especially as a younger guy, I think some finance folks have a little bit of an edge. So I would say, be nice. It sounds really trite, but like, especially if you're the budget guy, right, from an FP&A organization. I mean, people really, they're worried about, oh, this is going to be a big negotiation, right? So you have to kind of win them over, and you have to kind of partner with them and try to make it a group win, that kind of thing. And if you can do that, you'll get invited back, to help them out on some sort of project. I doing FP&A at like a mid-sized company was really a wonderful sweet spot for me, because it's, small enough so that, like, there's not analytical people in every function. So like HR probably doesn't even have any finance kind of people in it, or merchandising or operations or whatever. So you get to help them out, and it's just a great learning place. So yeah, I know it sounds trite, but be nice. Try to this is another kind of trite thing, but be hard on the issues, but not on the people, that sort of thing. Because you got to work through some hard stuff sometimes. I would say on networking, I had really good luck with fellow alums, either from school or from, past work associates. I mean, those were always the strongest for me, and maybe that's too obvious. But sometimes it's kind of serendipitous. I mean, you meet somebody and, they went to the same school that you did or something, and you get to know them like at parties or something, and then something pops up, and it's not like you even intended it, but I always had good luck with that. So I guess it's be open to serendipity, and I guess don't get too linear, like you said. It can be kind of a jungle gym sometimes.
Yeah. Well, and that, at the core of building those relationships and that network is being nice. So there's a common theme there, and we see it quite a bit. We get a lot of questions around technical skill sets, soft skills, that type of stuff, where you have to be able to build those relationships, and being nice and nice but firm at times, that's at the core of it. And then the other piece, that there's no better way to be a strategic partner to the business than to have sat in that person's chair as well, to understand where they're coming from and being able to relate to them and build relationships that way too. So you touched on a couple of key components there, I think.
Peter,
Yeah.
you worked across areas outside of Treasury. A lot of our listeners are very fixed in the Treasury space. What would you see as some of the benefits of being a broader background rather than just Treasury?
Yeah, like my journey was doing, I guess I did FP&A and some internal audit stuff and tax and risk. And then, like I said earlier, one big opportunity for me that really kickstarted my career in a way was a spinoff. And so we needed to have a treasurer. We needed to be a standalone company. And I was a known commodity, but and I had done a little bit of investment banking, and I knew the operations a bit, but a lot of the treasury stuff was new to me. So I came in sort of from more of a strategy perspective, and not, I didn't know a whole lot about cash management. So that was this kind of a strange. I mean, they took a chance with me, I think, and if I think that can happen, but you sort of have to put in your dues. This is the internal route, right, rather than the because they could have obviously found somebody from the outside to take the job. So the internal candidate can win. You can land the job. It doesn't always happen, but I was pretty fortunate. I hope I answered your question.
Well, and it begs another question that's important, maybe it feels like it's been implied or you've already touched on it, but just from a practical standpoint, what would you say are some recommendations that you'd have for those who want to take your advice and be a little more patient, maybe move laterally as opposed to up the ladder, and expand their experience within finance rather than staying in Treasury specifically?
Yeah, it kind of depends on on the person. I've seen people succeed in other areas that are really good process improvement people. I think a lot of Treasury stuff is you're trying to find these like little improvements, right? And across sometimes a lot of money, right? So a little percentage can make a big difference, kind of thing. And that kind of being able to work through complex processes and think about the organization, not just within Treasury, but it could be like in a retailer, armored cars or whatever, it could be operational. That kind of stuff can lend itself to all kinds of different, it doesn't have to be technology. It can be more process, but it can involve technology. So that's one way to go. And then I'd say if you have sort of more of an analytical / accounting / finance, FP&A is great. It's a great place to go into a company. And as we were chatting earlier, there's corporate FP&A. Sometimes there's divisional FP&A, and all of them are good. I mean, you learn, in some ways, I think divisional FP&A is, at least if it's a company like Nordstrom that's a little bit bigger, is even better because you get closer to the operations. And the corporate FP&A are, cleverly adding up numbers, consolidating basically. So, so I think, yeah, depending on the person, those are two really pretty good routes if you want to expand your toolkit out of Treasury.
No, and that's great insight, because we get a lot of questions around, especially with Treasury being so specialized. And over the course of the last year, obviously hiring and budgets have been kind of tight. So we do get a lot of questions around, hey, where do I have transferable skills? Where else can I go? How else should I be looking at this? And we always kind of think that for the most part, Treasury does sit between accounting and FP&A. So depending on the person and their background, you can play in either world. It's all a matter of really what you want to do.
Right.
So, well, I guess along those lines, knowing that you've been in leadership, you've sat in the C-level, you've been in the treasurer's seat, what are the key things that you usually look for in your direct reports when you go to hire for your team?
I look for people that, these are like, if you could tick all the boxes, this would be the sort of dream candidate, I guess. Someone who I think, can influence people, somebody who can do their homework, be sincere, admit when they make a mistake. Hopefully they don't make too many mistakes, but at least when they do, they could admit it. Because I've seen some people that are just, kind of fragile because, I like people that can bring solutions and alternatives, because sometimes there's a problem and, and that's not what you want to hear. You don't want somebody to come and, oh no, there's this big problem, the wire didn't go out or something. It's like, well, why, and so if they don't even know why, that's not good. Right. So you want to know, like, why did it happen and how can we fix it? And maybe if there's different alternatives, like, let's talk about it. So that's the kind of person you want. You don't want to just have to get sucked into something. And that's exactly what, if you're, you're a treasurer and you need to raise money and you're going to have to go talk to the board. I mean, that's what they want to hear. They don't want to hear, we have a problem. They want to hear, this is what we need to do, and this is why we need to do this, and maybe there's alternatives, so you can lay out some alternatives, and I considered these things, and this is the one that we should move forward on, that kind of thing.
No, that's great insight. And then I guess from a soft skill or a technical skill standpoint, do you put more weight on one than the other? Does it need to be a combination? What are your thoughts around those?
I think a combination, of course.
Yeah.
Everybody talks about how soft skills are so great, and they're really important. So don't get me wrong, but it's really a combination. I always think it's really good if people can sort of consider their audience, bring some context to the situation, and we used to joke about like dumbing it down for the board, but or bringing it up, so that they don't need to know about the minutia of Treasury, right? So they need sort of some board level stuff. They don't need a 40-page document, they need something that they're actually going to read because it's 2 pages long or something, and just sort of lays out something that's pretty thoughtful.
Peter, speaking of the C-suite and the board, what do you think makes a successful treasurer in the eyes of the C-suite?
One thing is you got to know the folks. I think partly it's what I just said, try to make it simple to the extent that you can without dumbing it down. I mean, just try to boil it down and get rid of the semantics and all that. But part of it's considering who, because without using names, I was at one apparel company in the Midwest, and the CEO didn't want to hear anything about it. I mean, it was just like, go, run, So he wanted to talk about clothes, he wanted to talk about so if somebody like that, you just try to make it super, super short. Hopefully you don't even have to talk to him. You can just talk to the CFO or something and make it happen. But other organizations are, way more it's more of team consensus oriented, like Nordstrom. And then there, it takes longer certainly to get things done, but sometimes you get a much better result. So, but I would say that like at a place like Nordstrom, obviously the influencing, the communication is paramount. And more at a place like the place in the Midwest, it would be more just hard, abilities, analytical skills, because the CEO doesn't want to even talk about it.
Yeah. And really what I'm taking away from that is almost kind of being like a chameleon, being able to read your audience, being able to, like you said, adapt your communication style, maybe in some places your management style, even your executive presence, depending on the environment that you're in. So you just have to be nimble in that regard.
I think that's fair. Yeah.
So on just in terms of what makes a good treasurer, particularly with the advancements we're starting to see in technology and doubtless we'll continue to see, how do you view the role of the treasurer changing in the coming years?
Yeah, I think it's this is probably pretty obvious, but there's going to be a lot of change, and I think it's foolish to outsource any of the kind of strategy stuff. I mean, you can't just go to a bank or an investment bank and say, I want you to take this over. I mean, I think that would be a huge mistake. I've seen people, try to outsource HR, for instance, and I think you could outsource a lot of the little processes, or activities, but you need someone in-house that's going to sort of, because you can trust, that person. So I'm sure there'll be a tremendous amount of change. There'll be artificial intelligence, there'll be outsourcing, there'll be all kinds of things that'll probably eliminate, some of the spots it's funny, thinking about different companies, how, if you'd like say treasury operations versus, the other part of treasury, the part that's a little bit more strategy, capital markets, that kind of stuff. It's very different from company to company, but I think you kind of you always need the cash management part. I could see that maybe shrinking a bit, over time. The more capital markets part, that could shrink. I'm not sure if it would or not. Most companies, I think it's pretty small. And like at Nordstrom, that's a place where they turn people through. So that's a great place, like for typically an MBA person would go in there and then they'd probably go out someplace else. It's not as operational, but anyway, I hope it's probably pretty obvious stuff. I don't know. You guys are probably seeing the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you say it might be pretty obvious. I think one thing that we have learned is that the benefit of you sharing, your opinions and what maybe does feel a little bit obvious, oftentimes isn't to everyone out there. But to your point, it does kind of keep in line with a lot of the the answers that we get to that question from others as well. So, but yeah, appreciate that. And
I was going to say, it's amazing though how many people have tried to outsource things and then they bring them back because it didn't work. They outsourced their tax department to India, didn't work, bring it back. So it's something that can cause a lot of hiccups. And it always, it's kind of like software salesmen. You find out later it doesn't do what you thought it was going to do, right?
Oh yeah. There's a fair amount of that in our space as well. It's a shiny marketing slick and sales pitch, but then when you actually get into the solution, quote unquote, you find out all the things that they obviously didn't tell you. I'm going to go ahead and preempt Joe's question here around comments or questions from the audience, and we don't have any. So per usual, I'll quickly put the plug in for any of those watching right now. If you have questions for Peter, please put them in the comments. I'm going to be checking one more time here before we wrap up.
Yeah, and even just going back to the outsourcing model, I mean, that's where it's important, at least in my opinion, to take a look at the entire picture. Think of the downstream impact, not just the fact that it may be a little bit cheaper, or you know, you can play around with money a little bit more that way. So I think where a lot of, at least in my experience, where you see a lot of the outsourcing model take shape is usually because they're looking to conserve cost or expenses at some given point, and it sounds a lot better than it actually is. And then, yeah, it does. I've seen it blow up quite a few times.
I've seen it work though too. I mean, like sometimes there's some little specialty, you know, and like in tax, like there's this thing called the work opportunity tax credit, and you would never do it in-house. There's these little outfits and they do a great job and they don't cost much and they're really good at it. And so why would you, you know? So it's, I think it depends. I mean, it's
Yeah.
the typical right answer to almost anything.
Absolutely.
Well, there are no questions, so I think, you know, unless there's anything else you'd like to share with the audience here today, Peter or Joe, Simon, I'll leave it to you, Joe, to wrap up for us here.
Yeah, last call. Simon, Peter, anything you want to add before I close this out here? All right.
All
Well,
right. Thank you guys.
No, absolutely. Thank you for your time as well, Treasury community. Thanks for tuning in to this practitioner LinkedIn live chat. We do have these every Wednesday, along with our Ask a Treasurer on Fridays and our Ask a Treasury Recruiter on Mondays. Till then, take care, reach out if you need anything, and we'll talk to you then.